You're listening to the We Are Libertarians Network. Learn more at wearelibertarians.com. We Are Libertarians. It's a podcast that brings you all of the irreverence that modern politics deserves. Join Chris Spangle and Greg Lenz every week as they discuss current events, politics, and society from a libertarian point of view.
Welcome to the Chris Spangle Show, where we're going to talk all about how to keep a successful relationship.
Yeah.
Chris, you know all about this one.
Yeah. No, when you learn a lot, and when you fuck it up.
You didn't fuck it up. I want that to be part of the show.
Welcome to the Chris Spangle Show, where we talk about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And this is a show where we talk about pretty much whatever I want to talk about. Apart from Bob and Tom and libertarian stuff, obviously my main hobby is podcasting. And I'm sitting down today with Brad Shoemaker, who runs... What's the name of this place?
Officially, it's Creative Zombie Studios.
Okay.
But we are one little studio in the midst of Invention Pictures, run by my friend Nathan Roush. He owns the building, which is a beautiful firehouse. Mm-hmm. Former firehouse, I guess. They're not really doing a whole lot with the firehouse stuff now, but turned it into a studio where we've got video editing capabilities, green screen, nice big huge white cyc wall, all in the place where the former fire trucks used to reside.
Yeah, it's a beautiful space for creating podcasts, videocasts, all kinds of different stuff. A little bit about Brad. We humbly say that between the two of us, we probably started most of the podcast in Indianapolis. Would you say that's fair?
I would say it's very close to fair.
Sure.
I mean, there are a lot out there that are doing things, so I guess I can't say that to be politically correct. But yeah, it's fair. We've started them all.
Yeah, all of them.
It's kind of like the coaching, what do they call it?
The coaching tree.
Yeah, the coaching tree in the NFL,
right.
Or I guess NBA too. I guess it shouldn't be just the NFL, but basically you've got Belichick, and then you have his minions of the evil coaches that have gone out into the NFL, and you've got Tony Dungy and his minions of awesome coaches that have been out in the NFL.
You're Parcells, and I'm the West Coast. What's the West Coast guy?
Nobody cares.
I don't know sports. I don't know anything about it. So I really have been into podcasting since it first kind of started in 2004. I've always loved to be researching tech and looking into tech.
You mean pre-podcast name?
Right. There wasn't even a name for podcasts. There was
no iTunes.
Yeah.
It was like the tumbleweeds, the wild, wild west of podcasting back then.
I downloaded Odeo.
Nice. I loved Odeo.
Which was the guys from Twitter, their first adventure. Now, I wanted to start one in 2005, but I never really got around to it, not until 2008. But Brad was the first guy to really start to do podcasting in a serious way with the Hammer and Nigel show. When did the Hammer and Nigel show start?
Well, my official foray into podcasting was kind of a cheap foray into podcasting. I wouldn't even call it. It was podcasting in the technical sense of the word, and that the stuff was out there. It had an RSS feed of sorts. I don't think it even had that at the beginning, but with JMV's show back when he was on WNDE here in Indianapolis.
Yeah, because your background's actually radio.
Yeah, my background is radio. I assistant produced Mark Patrick's show before him, and then JMV's show. They're both sports shows based here in Indianapolis. And they, when JMV kind of took over, I had more freedom to kind of do more things, and I was huge into this. I really need to get this thing on the web because, to me, I love the web. I was dabbling in design for other companies and stuff, so that was kind of my side gig, was doing websites for people, and I really just enjoyed doing that. So we put his show out there, and it did have an RSS feed. It was sometimes updated, sometimes not. So it was my first foray into podcasting. That was probably 2005, 2006.
Right.
But then I became the web director and would tell everybody they should be doing podcasting and pushing stuff to the web. All of my radio jocks at Clear Channel, but most of them didn't.
Q95, X103, 1260.
Yeah, 1260.
Right.
Now JMV's at 1070 The Fan, the competitor, and I could care less because I'm not in any of those places anymore. So they got a great guy. But it kind of went to that point where when I became web director and I had so much more to deal with social media and stuff, I kind of dropped out of the podcasting world. As far as I would tell the jocks that they should be doing it, and none of them really took up that mantle and did it. It wasn't until I was let go in October of 2010 that, I was like, well, hell, now what do I do? And that was when I was approached by Hammer, a good friend of ours. He used to work at a competing radio station, but I'd known him for years.
I worked with Hammer and produced his show at WXNT, a sports show. He even let me guest host it one time because they were so desperate.
Notice he said one time.
One time. Well, I know nothing about sports, and they literally had nobody else who could do it, and so they let me do it. And I played Coldplay as a bumper, and Hammer called and
Are we allowed to?
Yeah, you can. Okay. He's lost
because
his shit.
Most podcasts you can, but you're the political professional, whatever. I just jack around with these things.
Yeah,
in a professional way. But
so Hammer and I go way back from my WXNT days, and yeah, Hammer and Nigel was on X103. They started a podcast, so it was 2010.
It was 2010 when Hammer called Nigel and I together. I had worked with Nigel before at X103. Hammer had never actually met Nigel, but we remembered what kind of a cool guy he was on the radio, loved his attitude, said that's the guy I want to co-host with. It was also a strategic advantage, too, because he knew that Nigel had probably the biggest name of the two of us, I guess out of the three of us.
Right.
And in a weird kind of fashion, I had probably the second biggest name out of the three of us, and I didn't really speak on the mic. I'm not one to be out in front of the mic very often.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. Hammer was a real nobody. No.
Yeah, I mean, he was known in certain circles, but he wasn't known like he is now. Now, it's because of his mentality. He is the go-getter. I mean, he just flat out will hustle and talk to anybody and everybody and network and then get them on the show. I'm the guy that, I talk to anybody and stuff, but most of the time my focus is getting the show ready to go, getting the show finished and tearing down and getting everything out the door. And by the time I've done that, everybody's gone. The party's over. Right. So I don't really network with as many people as I'd love to. But he approached Nigel and I and said, I've never met Nigel. I know you've worked with him, but I'd really like to do this. And we need somebody who can be the technical guy. And you've been the web director for Clear Channel for 5 or 6 years. And you've done the podcasting thing a little bit before. You kind of can help me with that side. And then we'll work on making sure that we get the talent and we sell the thing. And that's kind of the way it went. And so from January 27th, 2011 was our very first show. We're well over 5 years now, and just finished up show 250. And if you're counting, that means that, yes, we've taken some time off from time to time. Not long stretches. Usually we'll miss a show here and there.
Correction. Nigel has taken some time.
Nigel has taken the majority of time off, but the show itself has had its, I think this year we've missed the most amount of shows that we've ever missed, and a lot of it's just freak coincidences with Hammer back into radio, and as the IBC promotions director, he's just had to miss, and when he misses, Nigel always misses, so we wind up not doing the show, even though I'm ready to go. I'm there. I'm good to go. But,
it's so funny because I'm always an early guest on a lot of podcasts, but then they get successful and then they stop inviting me back because they can get real guests.
Well, we've invited you back before. In fact, you were supposed to be on several weeks ago, and you had some issues.
Yeah, I got dumped, and so I couldn't make it because it was the whole point was that my girlfriend and I were going to be on, and then we broke up, and so we couldn't come on. And
you couldn't have still come on and just pretended. I mean, come on, she should have at least wanted to do that, right? Because she wanted to up her game by being on a better podcast than what you have, right? Sorry.
So, Brad, now, and then I helped act as a producer for a short time on some of those early podcasts, and that was always fun doing setup, and I thought it was so cool that, you did these remote podcasts, and you could pay me, $20-$50 to come out and do, to me, it just was so amazing that somebody was making some money, or I was like, wow, he's, actually doing this. And that's what inspired me to... I actually stupidly took out a $1,500 extra loan on my car.
Nice.
Added to my car payment and bought the original podcast equipment in 2011, late 2011.
You say stupidly as if it was a bad thing.
Yeah.
It's obviously led to good things.
Absolutely. It's led to a passionate hobby.
Now, do I tell most people to do that? Absolutely not.
No. And so watching what you guys did with the Hammer and Nigel podcast with Nikki and Joni's Cocktail Talk.
Right.
and some of the other shows that you were doing. That's what inspired me to start to actually bite the bullet, get the equipment, and start the Libertarian Party of Indiana podcast, and We Are Libertarians, which has now grown into the network of which the Chris Spangle Show now appears. So thank you for your influence. But
absolutely,
does
that mean you're kind of under my coaching cred? Which then I know you were kind of there anyway. But so that means I've totally started everything around here.
Yeah. I'll come under your coaching tree a little bit.
Just don't screw up, because then I'll have to kick you out and be like, I've never heard of this guy before. I don't know anything about him.
I don't know how I could screw up. I've tried to say everything I possibly can say, and people just keep listening.
Well, it's because you have 0 listeners, so it helps.
Thank you.
No, I'm joking.
Thank you.
I know he has tens of listeners.
Tens and tens. So 2013, fast forward, Brad and I start talking about the future of podcasting, and both of us are very bullish on the future, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment, but... we actually talked about a podcast studio at one point.
We did.
We were looking for
one
space.
One of us succeeded very well. The other of us succeeded very well, I guess.
Yeah.
In a different manner of speaking. But
yeah, so we were looking for space because we just thought, it'd be cool to have a clubhouse. And you've managed to build your clubhouse. Can you kind of talk about what this space is? I mean, talk about the physical space, first of all.
Yeah, absolutely. When we first started looking at spaces... we had 2 very different ideologies. Mine was coming from the Hammer and Nigel show, where I basically, when I first started that show, we had to come up with everything. I'm not a radio engineer.
Right.
I've seen it done, so therefore I've slipped at a Holiday Inn. I guess I'm an expert, but
I've almost can do what our broadcast engineers can do, with the exception of the link ups.
Right.
So
I basically sat there and I was like, all right, how do we figure this out? And of course, I talked to some of our engineers too to get a good idea, but Eddie from Clear Channel, he's amazing. iHeartRadio, whatever you want to call him now. He's amazing. But,
great guy.
But basically, it kind of hit that point where it was like, well, hell, I need to figure this out. And little by little, we cobbled together equipment, some of it bad, some of it good. I've made a lot of bad podcasting purchases.
Same here.
And then as it grew, I was like, well, how do we up our game from everyone else? We're doing it at a bar. We're doing it live. We were live streaming at the time to Ustream. Now we live stream to YouTube. We were, I was like, how do we up our game? Well, we can add a webcam. So we added a webcam. And I think we had the webcam early on, but it was just a one-shot thing.
Yeah.
And then about a year and a half, 2 years in, I was like, we can do 2 webcams, or 3 webcams. We can do a multi-switch show of people just talking into mics. I don't really know.
And that's always how it starts. It always starts out with, let's buy this $100 board and these $20 microphones and start. And then like 5 years down the road, you're like, I really need the PreSonus. It's $1,600, but then it's going to do like it always like tumbleweeds, because there's always another thing, another piece of layer that you can add to it.
Every time like I just did Indie PopCon and we did a live panel. Every time I talk about podcasting, the one thing I have to absolutely suggest is start with your phone. You have a phone.
Right.
Use the recording feature. If you want an interview, it looks kind of stupid, but at the same point, it is something you typically have on you. Therefore, use it. See if you like doing it. If you like doing it, step up into the little bit better, options.
It is very, very, you and I have fallen into this, I'm sure, given how far our equipment has gone and continues. I mean, we have 2 stages of growth at We Are Libertarians. We're about halfway through the first round, and then the second round is, $3,000 or $4,000 worth of equipment to kind of rival yours here. But it really doesn't matter the equipment that you used. I mean, we used a $120 board and a Alesis Multimix 8 and Shure SM48s for 3 years. It really comes down to what the content is. And so if you can make your phone sound good and you've got an idea that you think people are going to be into, then that's what matters. And good podcast art. Now,
there are very good tips and tricks, and we really should cobble them all together, because some I know, some I don't even know.
Sure.
Especially with dealing with low-end equipment and how to get the best out of it, because content is amazing, but my God, if I have to listen to content, it just stop, please. But you have to start somewhere. So I'm kind of
you're on Blog
speaking
Talk,
out of
Blog Talk Radio. Forget it.
Yeah. And Doug Carr went through that. I went to his office one time. Doug Carr, a local media marketing guy here in town, went to his office one time. He invited me to come in for his podcast, and so he pulls out the old speaker system for your conference rooms and starts talking through Blog Talk with 5 people around him talking into this thing, and I'm like, oh my God, kill me now.
Right.
I come from radio, and this is going to sound really bad.
And it did.
But at the same point, that was his first foray into podcasting, and he was making his mistakes too, and he upped his game. Now he's got a beautiful studio that has SM7B microphones like we have here. And I guess I'll get back to that question that you asked a long time ago. So back to what we were saying. We were kind of looking for space. I needed a video space. I really wanted to have a place where I could do video and audio because I had added it to Hammer and Nigel. It really doesn't get many views, but at the same point, it was just that thing that made me different than everybody else. I've always been a wow factor guy. Mm-hmm. I need to make it look good. I need to make it pop. That's why you're sitting in a studio that has a whiskey barrel with a concrete countertop, which, not very good for sound, but we'll get to that later. And a bottoms-up beer system in the middle. So while you're doing your podcast, you can reach out and get yourself a beer, which is wonderful. Right. But it's a piece that people look at and they're like, holy crap, what is that? Mm-hmm. I need to come check that out. Yeah. And so I guess I've always kind of been that guy, whereas you've been just give me a closet big enough to fit 4 or 5 chairs. Right. And enough where, our microphones won't sound like we're talking over each other, that they'll just get, my voice and not carried over from other voices. And let's just, that's all I needed. I just need a closet. Just get me something that is usable for audio.
Yeah, it's for me, it's about building community around the show. It's about the show and the content in and of itself. And I'm kind of going through that phase now where you're at, where it's like, all right, I got to build the wow factor, got to build out the equipment, got to build out we got to scale this. But fortunately, we're at a point now where we've got a community that will help fund that through the show. And it doesn't have to come out of my pocket, right? And so that's to me, it's always been probably an emphasis more on the content and the design of the show as opposed to the equipment. But the equipment is important, and it does get to a certain point where you need good video. You need, you can do We Are Libertarians for 3 years and get by, but then at a certain point, the market is going to move on, and you've got to grow with the market. In our space, Jason Stapleton comes in and has beautiful video and starts to see a lot of success. Well, you can use Facebook Live. You got to kind of grow along with it, and so that's where, you were ahead of the curve probably more than I was.
Well, I always knew that content I felt we had because the people I typically worked with were solid on the content areas. Sure. Some of the newer people that I've kind of got in that are not radio people, I've had to, kind of help them step up their game a little bit. And it's, you're always going to start somewhere. You have to start. If you're going to do podcasting, you just have to start. Because if you don't start, you'll make excuses. You'll never get it done. And you're always going to sound like crap when you first start, especially when you listen to it 5 years later. Yeah. Hammer and Nigel shows were good. Mm-hmm. They're really good. And in today's podcasting world, they are still really good early on, but compared to where they had grown and how they gotten used to each other over the years, they're better now. Yeah. It's just one of those things that if you don't start, you're never going to get over that hump of trying to learn it. And every new radio show, even experienced radio people have to get used to each other in order to get the show right. Totally. And you can go back and watch, early episodes of Friends or early episodes of anything and find out that, they just didn't quite have their characters down yet. The development wasn't there. The jokes that, would later pop up over the years weren't there.
Well, I work for a show where it's a rebuilding year in terms of chemistry, where it's people are trying to kind of get back to where,
That's awesome. The rebuilding year. I never, I should have looked at it like sports. Right. Bob and Tom's in a rebuilding year.
So whereas I about it, you know? I looked at it as build the business around this singular show. You look at it as a business. I'm going to offer a service to help you build your platform, whereas I'm going to build the show and the platform. So have you seen success in being a podcast producer for hire? So if you want a podcast that looks great, that's been produced in a great looking studio, you'll do all the work at various tiers of, space, frontal time, editing, all that. I'm sure you offer all kinds of different tiers of services, right?
And that's the other thing that we kind of differed at back then, which was I really wanted to take it up because I have put my money into it. I knew that I didn't have the community that because you had the libertarian community that, really needs a voice.
Right.
Because they get washed out very quickly by the two other sides. So you kind of had a space to really grow that group, whereas I'm coming into it from a space that comes from sports, comes from comedy. I've got my hands in a little bit of everything when it came to that stuff.
General talk is hard to start.
It's really hard to just push out there. Right. So I really had to and people knew me as BS from, a radio show, but that's faded over the years to the point where I'm kind of an unknown almost. And so I had to rebuild everything back up. And in doing so, I was putting my own money towards it. I was building up my own shows, building up the idea for it. And I really knew that I wanted it business focused. I knew that we didn't in Indianapolis specifically did not have a space for people to run a business podcast. And my whole dream, and it's not yet hit that point yet, my whole dream was always to let the corporate people pay for shows that would then in turn give me the opportunity to pay for just fun shows. So fun shows would be ad free, and the corporate shows that really, need it would be very content friendly and very fun and
but
less corporate-y.
Ads in and of themselves.
Yeah, but ads in and of themselves.
Right.
So we're kind of in the middle of that experiment to see whether it works or not. We're getting there. I'm definitely generating revenue, and it's definitely going out the door as fast as I generate it. But,
of course, right.
But we're not necessarily in the red, so to speak. We are a little bit, but overall, we're kind of hitting that point where I think where we'll be climbing out of that in about the next year, 2 years. And the space has grown too. I mean, with Serial and NPR and stuff like that getting into the mix, people are really starting to understand it better. But I still think we have a long way to go. And this space was built to kind of help facilitate that, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's we talked on last night. Greg and I recorded a State of the Union of We Are Libertarians as we are introducing a premium membership model to We Are Libertarians as a way to kind of help fund our growth. Because I
think that's a smart move. I think that's a smart move.
Thanks. I mean, adding a couple, extra hours of content a week that you're then going to put behind a paywall, you're not taking anything away. You're doing more. But then you're generating consistent revenue that can then be put into advertising and equipment. And you've got to build that platform before you can actually,
Exactly.
You've got to have people that will buy your product before you can do that. So you've got to, any kind of creative work, you've got to do what you love for free for a period of time until people are ready to give you money to do it.
Right.
And, it's not all about making money, because I don't think either of us, we would like to be rich one day, but really it's just, you want to wake up every day and you want to do podcasting, and because it's your passion, it's what you love to do. And, I'm fortunate that I lucked into Bob and Tom where I get to do that for a career, but I also long-term want to do this as my full-time job and focus on the Weird Libertarians Network. To do that, we've got to grow in advertising and revenue. Right. And I'm not convinced that selling advertising is the way to go in terms of podcast, at least at this point.
Right. Selling advertising right now is probably the low-hanging fruit. It's the easiest to get. It's the easiest to deal with. It's the easiest to try to make your money from. But any creative knows that taking the low-hanging fruit sometimes is the easy way out and not always the most lucrative at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to, forego the mindset of I need money now, and kind of work through that long-term strategy. How do I make the most money later? I mean, if you listen to Pete the Planner at all in his podcast, he often talks about the easy ways to do things don't always make sense for the psychology of it, I know a lot of times in finance, people want to get a 30-year mortgage because it's cheaper on the front end.
Right.
But you're paying double the price for the house. Whereas if you do a 15-year mortgage, you're not paying as much overall for the house. And yeah, it's probably a little more expensive now. But at the end of the day, you're going to be done in 15 years and you've not paid your life away for this house,
Sure.
So it's kind of that mentality of you can't just take the low-hanging fruit sometimes. Just I mean, sometimes you have to. Sometimes you absolutely have to get something done. But if you really want to have a long-term strategy, you have to look through it and find out how can I make the most of it over time. And, I would love to be doing this for a really long time. I don't want it to end tomorrow. I don't want to, I don't want to put myself in positions where it's going to be that thing that just consumes me and destroys me by day's end, whereas I could be doing this for years on out.
You don't want to go full Mike Tyson.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, you run a group, a meetup of podcasters here locally. Where can people how can people get in touch with that group?
They can either contact me through the creativezombie.com website, or they can go to Podcast Indie, or is it? Yeah. Podcast Indie. Sorry, Indie PopCon, Podcast. There's too many indie things out there. Podcastindie.com will take them, I believe, to our meetup group. You can also search for podcast, I guess, on meetup.com. And you can also go to Facebook with Podcast Indie, where Meetup and Facebook are pretty much the two areas where I think I push out the events the most.
Right.
So just look for us. You'll find it.
So what have you learned over the last year that you've been running that group from fellow podcasters? What are kind of the trends that you see amongst that group of people?
I've learned that we still have a long way to go. Mm-hmm. And I've learned that there are so many more people out there doing this than I even imagined. I mean, I knew there was a lot of people out there that I didn't know, but I've met quite a few new people. I've seen quite a few different things of what they're trying to do. And, it's been interesting because I've always said that podcasting is that area that's not... You're not beholden to the old ways of doing things.
Right.
You can be creative with it. And I think that, watching this group and seeing the different people come through, that it's a very creative bunch and they're doing widely different things. And I believe that's probably a good thing for the overall push of podcasting. I know I see a lot of people doing the same things too, doing what we're doing, which is the kind of the easiest way to get in, which is the interview. But I'm really interested and intrigued in trying to start doing more content stuff, more storytelling, because I love doing interviews, and you can do interviews easily. It's an easy thing to get into. It's hard to actually master it.
It's hard to sustain, and you have to be good at it.
Yeah. But an area that I've not really tried as much, and something that really intrigues me, are the story podcasts that are coming out. Things that involve more editing, more scripting. Just it's a different way to look at it. It's more like a TV show. It's more like your old school radio days of telling stories.
Sure.
And I really want to see where that goes.
One of my absolute favorite podcast, I have two. It's the Mike O'Meara Show, which is a lot of what We Libertarians is modeled after, but the Memory Palace. And it's a music bed and the host telling a story. And, the guy, I don't know how he finds the stories to write them, but it's very well done, and it has to take a ton of time to research, write, record, get it right. So it is. I think there is that next level, and I think those people are rewarded in iTunes. If you look at the top of the charts, those people are up there, as opposed to people, like the Chris Spangle Show, who are...
Oh, you'll hit the top of the charts one day.
One day.
When everybody else dies. But, and you're the only one left. The true story. Let's see, the two podcasts that I've really kind of fallen in love with, one hasn't put out one in a while, and the other is getting ready for a TV show ramp up. So who knew? That's another thing. Crossover between media is going to be huge coming up in the future, and the one podcast I'm about to talk about, Lore, which you've heard of Lore. I don't know, it just intrigued me from the start because I love the idea of vampires and stuff like I don't. It's fun watching movies and True Blood and stuff like that with vampires, but it's fun listening to the actual facts that led up to the ideas and what medieval people used to think of how things happen, and all the ghost stories and stuff that happened that faced America, Europe, and all those places. It's just fun listening to how those kind of came about and where we get our ghost stories from. It's those periods, and actually listening to Lore string them all together is a lot of fun, and that's actually getting ready to be turned into a TV pilot.
Cool.
So the one of the ladies who works on The Walking Dead is moving it to into production. So that'll be interesting to see how that comes out. Another one that I just happened upon, I don't even know where I found it, but it's called True Story. And it's basically groups of people that get up and tell a story from start to finish about some sort of topic. And I know they have true story parties on college campuses and stuff, and some of those get then submitted to this podcasting site, and then they of course pick the best ones and put them out there. And it's just fun listening to random people tell a story. I've never met these people, but for some reason I am fascinated by what they have to say.
Well, that's the foundation of human communication, is storytelling, and I firmly believe that we need storytelling as much as we need food and water.
Absolutely.
It's how we connect with each other, because we're social animals. And I'm not surprised that so many of these storytelling podcasts are so popular. You look at even something like Dr. Drew and Adam Carolla's podcast, which I listen to daily. It's people calling in, asking questions about their struggle, and you connect with them because, I struggle with that too. Or, and that is what the beauty of podcasting and radio really is that it gives you more freedom to tell human stories than I think TV or movies do, or even written, because it's just directly right in your brain.
And the great thing, again, we hear this all the time, but podcast, and I know this sounds like an infomercial for podcasts, which I guess is what it is anyway, right? But with podcasting, you can do it while you're cleaning the house. You can do it while you're mowing the lawn. You can do it while you're driving. You can do it while you're washing dishes. I do a lot of chores, don't I? You can do it while you're at work. It's that thing that you can have in your eardrums while you're using your hands and visuals for other things. So it's not like it's something that you have to like watch, and therefore you can't really do a whole lot else while your eyes are focused on the screen. Mm-hmm. It's not like, you have to, I don't know, it's just an experience that is unlike anything else. And because of that, and it's in the hands of a bunch of people now, it's not radio.
Right.
And don't get me wrong, I love the radio background, and as I've always said, radio exists. Radio will most likely always exist in our lifetimes in some form or another, whether it's in its current form or not. I mean, people thought AM was dead a long time ago, and they wound up reinventing themselves with talk. And now talk's moving to the FM. It's just one of those where it will exist. The numbers aren't going away for radio.
People like curated content.
Yeah.
And that's what radio is to me.
And, podcasting is still in a very much a wild, wild west thing when it comes to curation, and it's more difficult to find. The discoverability is a little bit harder, but it's still there.
Yeah, it's hard for podcasts like the ones that we produce to get noticed, because if you're in the top 200 of iTunes or 100 of iTunes, every podcatcher pulls that iTunes API, and you gotta be up there, because it's hard to break through and get up into that without some, I'm not gonna say trickery, but you really got to get a mass of people to download immediately or rate and review immediately.
Right. I think the biggest issue facing podcasts right now is marketability. Mm-hmm. I think the old marketability of podcasting is still there. Everything that we just said about being able to listen wherever, and the amount of people that are doing it, and the amount of varied things that you can hear, and the creativity of the thing. Because again, when you try something in podcasting, you don't have to throw it out on the wall and be like, oh crap, we just lost millions of dollars because it didn't work.
Right.
In TV, they put a pilot out there and it sucks. Guess what? You've just lost several $100,000, if not $1 million or $2 million, based off that couple episodes that you threw out there. When you throw a radio show out there, you still may lose thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars. But when you put a podcast out there, I can change it. I can try it out. If it doesn't work, what'd I lose?
Yeah.
My time. That's about it.
I've fired 2 people along the way of We Are Libertarians. But yeah, I think it is great. It's a medium that is stretched, but it's got a long way to go, and we're right at the beginning of it. And social media is so helpful. We wouldn't have podcasts if it weren't for social media.
Correct.
Meaning you and I. I mean, wouldn't. We Are Libertarians would not exist without people sharing it on their social networks.
Mm-hmm. So a couple things that I see in the future. And of course, there's things that I see for myself that I need to start. I've always thought starting an NAB of podcasting would be a wonderful thing, because the NAB, it protects broadcasters. It lobbies for broadcasters in Congress. It goes out there and it tries to teach people about HD radio back when that was the up and coming thing.
Right.
It's the kind of the marketing arm / lobbying arm of podcast or radio, and we don't have that. Podcast, the one thing that I've noticed about podcasting and podcasters is we're so focused on either our own stuff or helping other podcasters, because that's the amazing thing about podcasting is the people are willing to help.
Sure.
And you can find groups all over the place that teach you how to do everything and anything.
Right.
But we don't really have a lot of people pushing out podcasting in general, not just here's my show or here's my friend's show. It's how do we push out the general viability of podcasting, and I think we're missing that. And I bought Discover Podcasts and ExplorePodcast.com with some sort of focus and idea to try to market podcasting as a whole, not just here's Adam Carolla, because the big names get out there. That's easy. The smaller names get out there through being pushed by friends and family, but there's still a ton of people out there that don't know how to turn on a podcast.
Yeah, to grow a show like ours, you've got to scrap and fight for every single subscriber, because you're not on Podcast One or Adam Carolla's network or whatever. But Carolla is a great example. When the industry was threatened with patent trolls, Carolla had to organize a group of people like the Nerdist folks and others to really make sure that podcasting was protected. But I do see there are like Norm Padditz, who started Westwood One, now has Podcast One. That they are the first kind of corporate podcast entity, I think.
Right.
And so
beyond like Stitcher and TuneIn or whatever. Yeah, they're the ones that
they're not a platform. While they are a platform, they're a sales network, and that's an arm that adds a whole layer of complexity and responsibility and officialness.
Right.
So I think that'll be good for the
It's
industry.
an interesting, I guess, fork in the road that we find ourselves in the podcasting world, and that is you've got the entities like Stitcher and of course Podcast One and several clones trying to be Podcast One. Because Podcast One has grown big over the past couple years.
Yeah.
And it's got a very radio heavy background. It's got something that's, they're doing things the way broadcasters do things. And sometimes that's a great thing. Sometimes that's a bad thing. The sales arm is huge, and that's awesome. And it's something that, even I am envious of at times, but at the same point, is the sales arm swinging the right way? I don't know. It's one of those where it's really going to be interesting to see where things go, because you've got this huge divide now of what we would call professional podcasters and the people who've been there or have either been there all along or are on the smaller level. And how do you get those two both to equally stand out? Obviously, celebrities and everything are always going to have the upper hand, because they just
do. Got platforms in other areas.
And it's not like people can't break into that world, because people break into being a celebrity all the time. It's just people, in the podcast world have to understand that that's not an everyday occurrence. And just like in Hollywood, there are a million actors out there that are awesome. They're great in theater. They're great in small video productions here locally. They'll never make it into Hollywood, not because they're not talented enough, but just because sometimes you have to be at the right place at the right time.
It's the free market, baby.
Yeah.
You really, it's time and talent. It's how much experience, time, and talent are you willing to throw at this?
Time, talent, and just being at the right... Time, talent, and luck.
Yeah.
There's no T for luck, is there?
No.
Okay. So, TTL, time, talent, and luck, which...
Yeah, it's totally possible to break out. It will happen to We Are Libertarians. We'll get there. So thank you for joining me. Is there any final thoughts that you'd like to share with the audience?
Just keep podcasting. Just keep doing it. Especially if you want to break in, if you've thought about breaking in, again, pick up your phone, do it. Because if you don't at least start somewhere, you're never going to start. And if you think that you have to go and compete with everybody else and get all of this brand new technology and stuff to do it, then you're never going to start.
Right.
It's one of those things that we talked about it before. It's I see people do that mistake all the time where they go out and they'll buy $5,000 worth of equipment and they'll mortgage their house to do it or something because they're idiots, I guess. I don't know. But they do it because they think they're going to love this, and then they get into it and they're like, Jesus, that's a lot of work.
It is, yeah. That's why
People
most
don't
podcasts
realize
last.
it.
Yeah, they don't last more than 3 months or 15 episodes because it's a ton of work, and you've got to be really committed and you've got to really love it. So yeah, just $79 Audio Technica USB microphone, get a Skype connection, talk with your friend, test it out, see how it feels, and then, after...
Then jump up to the H6s, then jump up to the big Mackie boards, then go to what we've got here in the studio, Presonus board, get the studio lights like we have, get the video equipment. But don't do that at first.
Not at all.
Just start.
Don't take out a secondary loan in your car.
And number 2, be creative. Because if you're not creative, if you can't think, I guess, oh man, we could go a little bit further into this topic real quick.
All right.
So my steps, just start, talk about what you love, because if you're not talking about something you enjoy, and trust me, podcasting, if you want a niche topic, this is the place to niche down.
Yeah.
You can't niche down in radio. You can't niche down in TV. You have to have a wide array of a wide audience to make money. In podcasting, I know salespeople will tell you, well, you need at least 10,000 people to make that's BS. That is complete BS. You can make money doing it other ways. And you can still get sponsors without having 10,000 downloads. You just, once again, have to be creative. So just start, talk about what you love, and then, of course, be creative with it. Don't think that you have to go out there and replicate something somebody else has done. You be your own show. If it works, great. If it doesn't, retool.
Right. I was talking to a comedian today at work, and I said, listen, he was asking me about a podcast. I said, don't be a comedian interviewing other comedians. Be like Kostaki, who starts a podcast about football, he's a comedian talking about football. Right. Or Pat Dixon, who's had success with his Crime Report podcast. He's a comedian talking about New York City crime, and so...
Or a football star, Pat McAfee, doing... I don't even know what the hell he does.
He does a lot. So, well, we've got to wrap up. I want to thank you for taking the time. How can people get in touch with you if they'd like to?
Producer BS on Twitter, creativezombistudios.com or creativezombie.com, either way. And just come to our meetups. Love to talk to you.
And if you're in the Indianapolis area, then please join a meetup so you can come check this place out. It is fantastic. Thank you for joining us here on the Chris Spangle Show. Thank you to BS for joining me, and I'm sure we'll talk again. And, hey, just get podcasting. We'll talk to you later. Hi, this is Chris Spangle. Can you hear how good I sound? I sound great. And you know why? It's because listeners like you go to wearelibertarians.com/wishlist, and you help us purchase new equipment. And then we take that equipment and we hook it all up, and then we sound really good. And the only thing that can possibly go wrong is if I forget to hit record one more time. So, if you want us to listen, getting new equipment isn't going to make everything better. There's still going to be problems with people like me and talking into the microphone, but you can make us sound really good as we're messing up by going to wearelibertarians.com/wishlist and purchasing an item today. It helps us grow, it helps us do more, and it helps us make sound better. Make sound better? That doesn't even mean anything. Well, I'm still not giving up, and I hope you aren't either. So please, wearelibertarians.com/wishlist. Thank you for listening to the We're Libertarians Network. Get our other shows at wearelibertarians.com.